Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to...
Is EU turning on Israel?
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Wednesday evening, Israeli soldiers opened fire towards a European delegation in the West Bank, a day after EU foreign ministers had agreed to review the EU's trade agreements with Israel over its latest assault on Gaza. Similarly, the UK announced on Tuesday that it was suspending its trade talks with Israel and considering sanctions against Israeli cabinet ministers, while France, the UK and Canada also issued a joint statement warning of concrete actions against Israel if it doesn't halt its military offensive in Gaza and immediately lift restrictions on humanitarian aid. This all came after Israel launched its latest military offensive, Operation Gideon's Chariots, in Gaza at the weekend, killing hundreds of Palestinian civilians, with the aim being, in Netanyahu's words, to take control of all the territory of the Strip. So in this video, we'll explore whether the EU is turning on Israel and what might happen next. Don't feel overwhelmed? Listen along in your favourite with the 7th. After the Hamas attack, support poured in from European nations for Israel. But once the scale and severity of Israel's assault on Gaza became apparent, a divide opened up within the EU. Countries like Germany, Austria and Hungary were generally more pro-Israel, while countries like Spain and Ireland were notably less pro-Israel, at least rhetorically. In fact, as early as November 2023, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was saying his government would work to recognise the state of Palestine, which, at the time, appeared vastly out of step with the messaging from his other European counterparts. Over the next months, as Israel intensified its military action in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as stepping up attacks on militias in Syria, Lebanon, and then striking Iran in October 2024, pro-Israel sentiment among European populations began to wane, and a gap opened up between European governments' positions and those of their electorates. While EU governments largely continued to express support for Israel, with former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying Israel was committed to human rights and international law, their electorates gradually became more critical of Israel's actions. A YouGov Eurotrack survey, published in November 2024, a year into the war, showed that in 6 countries, the UK, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Spain and Sweden, the share of the population that said Israel had gone too far and caused too many civilian casualties was at least double the share who said Israel's response was a proportionate response to the Hamas attacks. While in France this shift wasn't as notable, still a larger share of people, 26%, believed Israel had gone too far than the share, 18%, who said it had responded proportionately. Nonetheless, most European governments, including France, the UK and Germany, remained relatively muted in their criticism of Israel throughout 2024. However, this has now apparently changed. On Tuesday, France, the UK and Canada published a joint statement warning that they will take concrete actions if Israel doesn't halt its military offensive in
Yeah, interesting to see Canada involved in this too.
Canada wants to be in the EU.
Yeah.
Gaza and immediately allow aid trucks into the Gaza Strip. While statements like this are often mocked for lacking in substance, the leader's tone was actually quite striking. They called the actions of the Netanyahu government egregious, condemned the abhorrent language used recently by members of the Israeli government, and said, "We've always supported Israel's right to defend Israelis against terrorism, but this escalation is wholly disproportionate." That same day, the EU also announced it was reviewing its trade agreement with Israel over its actions in Gaza, with Chief Diplomat Kaja Kallas saying a strong majority of EU foreign ministers were in favour. Spain's parliament passed a non-binding motion calling on the government to ban exports of any material that could be used to strengthen the Israeli military, and the UK suspended its trade talks with Israel and is also considering sanctions on Israeli cabinet ministers, with UK Foreign Minister David Lammy describing Israeli ministers' plans for Gaza as extremist, repellent and monstrous. Then, to make matters worse, on Wednesday, Israeli soldiers opened fire towards a European diplomatic delegation in the West Bank, prompting Italy and France to summon their Israeli ambassadors. And the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas,
That's big. Opening fire on, EU diplomats. That's a bad move. That's big.
calling on Israel for an official investigation. All of this seems to be a reaction to both the collapse of the tentative ceasefire agreed by Hamas and Israel late last year.
Like, you're a fucking diplomat. You're not a soldier. Like, why is somebody shooting at you? Like, that's crazy.
And Israel's new and expansive military operation, dubbed Operation Gideon's Chariots, which began over the weekend. For context, Operation Gideon's Chariots is a massive operation consisting of a ground invasion.
They don't want the diplomat there, or it's becoming hostile. They give an opportunity. Okay, you must leave.
Yeah.
Take over.
Yeah, because,
Like as a decency and respect.
yeah, exactly. Yes, there's a reason, like, diplomats are protected from all the bullshit because they're diplomats. Like, I get it if there was a soldier shooting at another country, soldier by accident because you didn't recognize them, you can kind of play that off. That diplomats, they don't have weapons on them.
Of both northern and southern Gaza, backed by the Israeli Air Force. But earlier this month, concerns began to emerge that the operation was aimed at ethnically cleansing Gaza, which could constitute a crime against humanity or genocide under the UN's 1948 Genocide Convention. This is largely because the operation seems to include preventing humanitarian aid from entering Gaza and indiscriminate killing of civilians. Airstrikes in densely populated urban areas have killed hundreds of civilians in recent days, and on the 2nd of March, Israel began a blockade on humanitarian aid entering the Strip, which lasted for 11 weeks until Tuesday, when Israel finally agreed to let 100 aid trucks into Gaza. Throughout recent weeks, the UN has warned of mass starvation in Gaza, with the UN's humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, claiming earlier this week that 14,000 babies could die in 48 hours unless aid
That's
reached
crazy.
them. The rhetoric from Israeli politicians hasn't helped either. A few days ago, Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, claimed that Israel's goal is, quote, destroying everything that's left of Gaza, that we are conquering, cleansing and remaining in Gaza until Hamas is destroyed, and that Palestinians will, quote, leave in great numbers to third countries. Smotrich's comments were widely condemned by the international community, but Netanyahu doubled down, saying on X that Smotrich was telling the truth. Netanyahu then put out another statement on X, pushing back against the UK, France and Canada statement, and describing Israel's war in Gaza as a war of civilization over barbarism. So, what happens next? Well, for what it's worth, we imagine that Europe will continue.
I wonder if the comments are on or off, because I want to really know what people have to say about this. Because
Comments on for what, this video?
yeah,
This on. They always keep the comments on.
yeah, but because now I'm hearing cleansing.
That's what it's starting to sound like, yeah.
Continue to turn against Israel over the coming weeks. Netanyahu has shown no interest in de-escalating, and his spiky response to that statement from the UK, France and Canada suggests he has no interest in mending ties with Europe. Nonetheless, apart from strongly worded statements, there's not much Europe can actually do to change Israeli policy. Individual European countries could maybe impose targeted sanctions or recognise Palestinian statehood, but the EU is too divided to come up with a unified response, and even if it could, it's not clear what leverage Europe has over Israel that could force a change in policy. Ultimately, as is often the case, a lot here depends on the US, which is probably the only country with sufficient leverage over Israel and Netanyahu. While there are signs that Trump is getting fed up with Netanyahu and is ever-escalating assault on Gaza, there were even reports earlier this week that the White House is considering inviting former Prime Minister and Netanyahu rival Naftali Bennett to Washington, so far the US hasn't exerted any real pressure on Israel, and who knows whose side Trump will be on in a week's time. If you're engaged with...
Interesting. So it's on Trump.
Yeah.
This seems like it.
Because at first he was on the side of Israel.
I did see that he was started to turn at one point. Yeah, that's so wow. This is what Israel doing is fucked up. Shooting at the diplomats and then saying they want to kill. Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah. They're really America's friend more than ours, to be honest. I think framing it as unclear what leverage EU has over Israel is disingenuous. If Germany stops supplying arms and the EU as a whole sanction and boycotts Israel, that is a massive amount of leverage and has available. I mean, that's what I thought. I thought they could do the same thing they did with Russia, but I guess the difference is with Russia they weren't divided. It seems like they are divided over Israel. So, nie wieder or never again is a sentiment that must be a hell. Germany and Austria should take it seriously and stop any genocide they can.
Yeah. This is like, did you guys learn a lesson or no? We're gonna pretend nothing's going on.
Bro literally said cleansing. Like, what, bro? What would it take? Okay, so I guess it was translated incorrectly. My bad.
Oh. Oh. Can you read the replies?
Nothing. I think everyone has chosen their side at this point. I honestly don't think anything would really change, even if they flat out called it genocide themselves. Cleanliness is next to godliness. He didn't. I was just fact checked by a buddy. He said clearing. He's an awful, disgusting dude, but he didn't say cleansing at least. It translated it wrong. In Hebrew, the words cleansing and purification are the same. The word, whatever. What Smasher says was that Israel will purify the Gaza Strip, purified from threats. Oh, okay, lost in translation. Makes it a little bit better, I guess.
Scary, like,
Yeah, that word, yeah.
guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Rate, like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. Enjoy, shares, kindness as possible.